What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. It's been a couple days, but let's hop right into it. So our first tweet is from this guy, Vlad, and we have a response from Malte, who is the CTO of Vercel. And essentially, Vlad is responding to another developer named Luna, who posted that they had 100 million requests, 100 gigabytes of bandwidth flowing through Cloudflare, and they said, still crazy, this is all costing me $0. And then Vlad also posted his, which has 1.7 million unique visitors, 12 million requests, 147 gigabytes data served, and he says, agreed, this would bankrupt me on Vercel. And then Malte, the CTO of Vercel, comes in, he says, easily fits into our smallest plan. And there's a reply that says it might fit, but Cloudflare gives that zero overage peace of mind. So it is interesting. You know, they have a ton of beef for selling Cloudflare. They're always trying to get each other's customers. Cloudflare, though, does always have the upper hand in terms of not charging for bandwidth at all. I forget exactly how their business model works, but essentially since the beginning, even compared to AWS, that's why Cloudflare R2 is so popular, is that they have no need to charge for bandwidth. Whereas Vercel, I saw in a reply that the total for the free plan is 100 gigabytes data served. So here they would actually be over. They would have to use the $20 a month plan, which does cover a lot. I've always hosted on Vercel. I haven't hosted any of my web stuff on Cloudflare. I know they have like the Open Next, and they've been trying to make it so that you can host things on Cloudflare workers much easier, and that might be what's happening here. But I do use Vercel, the $20 plan. It does cover a lot. I have had instances in the past where I've had like my sites effectively DDoS, where I was doing like millions of requests per second or per minute, which did get me over the plan. I think I had to pay $300, and I basically had to beg Vercel to let it slide. So that was before they had all the firewall stuff as well. So it might be a better situation now. They are trying to make sure that people can't get DDoS, and it kind of was a meme for a while, like the Jmail guy stuff, like the Jmail stuff as well, where they were having a huge bill and Guillermo helped them optimize by removing analytics and stuff. But if you're hosting, Cloudflare is a good place to start, but Vercel also as well is a pretty solid place to host a website, and Expo for mobile, obviously. So I don't know, curious what you guys think. Okay, next we have a tweet from Karpathy. Kind of interesting, not too crazy. Essentially, he's saying like he has a new Mac Mini to tinker with claws over this past weekend, so we'll see if he has an update today. But it's interesting because he was really hyping up OpenClaw, CloudBot, they've renamed, but now they're not called OpenClaw. They got acquired by OpenAI. But he says in this tweet that he's a bit sus to give OpenClaw specifically his private data / keys, 400K lines of vibe-coded monster that is actively being attacked at scale is not very appealing to him, which makes sense, but it's also like people were really gassing it up. And I do like this idea of like not just trusting vibe-coded software like out the gate, especially if it has tons of lines of code. So essentially what he said though is that he likes NanoClaw, which is another launch that should be like faster. I think it can run on much cheaper hardware as well. And he said it's only 4,000 lines, so the code fits into his head and that of AI agents, so it feels more manageable, auditable, flexible, etc. And I think that's interesting. In like December when Claude Code was really taking off, everyone was like, oh, let's just ship as much as possible, and like we're just gonna use this code, we're gonna ship it. Pete from OpenClaw, he basically built like 26 packages to support OpenClaw, all the different functionality, and he did a really good job, and it's really cool. But we are definitely starting to see like kind of the pushback now of like, okay, let's step back, let's make sure the software we're using actually works, let's make sure we're not leaking private keys and stuff, which OpenClaw has never leaked private keys as far as I understand. I know there's vulnerabilities that people have exploited on like Moltbook, where that was just like a one-off software that basically just got hacked and exposed all the API keys. So I know people aren't using that anymore, but that wasn't OpenClaw doing that. But I definitely like this idea of like, let's kind of go back to like using software that we know is reliable, it has tests, it doesn't have too many open vulnerabilities. Maybe people are zero-daying it, I wouldn't be surprised. That's kind of how it is with new software as well. But it's good that Karpathy's kind of driving forward this idea of like, let's understand the code we're running as opposed to just this vibe-coded slop fest that we were working with before, but it seemed like everyone was on board with. So very interesting. Okay, next, just a really quick one that I wanted to cover just for the people that are interested in this kind of stuff. So this company, Talus Inc., said they spent $30 million on development with 24 dedicated people, extreme specialization, speed, and power efficiency. And they basically launched an AI model that you can go to, chatjimmy.ai, where it's like 16,000 tokens per second, which is much faster than like the normal like single double-digit type responses that you get from normal chatbots like Claude, ChatGPT, etc. So you can basically like put a prompt in here and have it spit out a massive wall of text. I don't really know what the value of it is, but people are really excited about it. And people were saying like the responses weren't that good, like there were responses like the math doesn't work and different things like that. So I don't know what the hype is about this, but people are really hype how many tokens this thing can generate. Maybe because it can generate tokens so quickly, that means that it just needs to improve the quality of the tokens that are coming back, and then it kind of wins on both fronts. But it is like one of those things where it's like you type a prompt and it has like 10 paragraphs that come back like instantly. So that's pretty cool, like in this new age of like chat assistants using AI. Okay, then next we have a tweet from Lit Capital, which is replying to Claude, talking about their new Claude Code Security that they've launched, where you can basically run a scan on your code bases using Claude Code, and it'll find vulnerabilities and help you resolve them, I believe, as well. And when that got launched, apparently CrowdStrike, Cloudflare, Palo Alto Networks, and Zscaler, which I guess are all security companies, or security adjacent all went down like between 5 to 10% in the stock market. So I haven't checked to see if they've gone up. These kind of like up and down, like they really don't know anything about tech, so they'll just kind of like follow the trends. And that's where it's like, if you want to be a trader, it's kind of interesting because you kind of need to not think like, oh, what is the logical response to this? It's like, what is like the median response to this in a way, or like what is the average investor going to respond to this? So with Claude Code launching their security stuff, which I think is sick, I haven't tried it out yet, but I definitely should just run a security scan on some of the code, would be very sick, and that's where we can solve a lot of the problems that are getting generated with AI, and just learn in general, because humans were writing vulnerabilities even before AI all the time. So this is a great step forward, but it's interesting to see how these companies are affected, even though like Claude Code launching this product doesn't necessarily like hurt any of these companies in a real way. It's just kind of driving the industry forward. So I don't know, investing, man, it's interesting, but Claude Code Security looks sick at least. Okay, next we have a tweet from Rita at Cloudflare, who we have covered a few of her tweets before, but this one's really sick. I think they do have a whole like blog post about it as well, or maybe even a paper. But essentially the idea is that Cloudflare has their new MCP server, but it only has two tools, search and execute. And by doing that, they basically reduce the number of input tokens for the context by 99.9% compared to like an equivalent native MCP implementation where they expose all the tools. As you can see here in the post, they say that actually their raw OpenAPI spec in prompt is 2 million tokens. The native MCP would be 1.17 million tokens. But now that they have this code mode where it's essentially just search and execute, they can deliver the entire API of Cloudflare in 1,000 tokens. So that's cool. All these like updates of trying to handle context, trying to make sure the AI understands how to read the context, making sure we're not spending too much on tokens. All of these innovations are really cool to keep an eye on, and we'll see how the industry keeps moving forward with things like this. Okay, next we have an outage that happened to Cloudflare on February 20th, and they have the postmortem in this blog, and it's so weird and interesting. Like, I guess I didn't fully understand what the code looks like, but they do show the exact code path that breaks. And essentially what they were doing is they were doing a GET request to an endpoint to see like which prefixes were pending being deleted, because they have this thing with where you bring your own IP, and I guess you want to delete your prefixes sometimes, so you make a customer support ticket, and then someone has to go manually delete like your entries for your IP, I guess, or for your domain, your DNS tied to that IP. So they would just fetch all of the prefixes that were pending deletion, right? And then they would just delete all of them. It doesn't actually really make sense when I looked at the code, because basically they have like a fetch for those pending prefixes, and they check to make sure it's not an empty string. But I guess apparently it was returning an empty string anyway, and that was causing them to basically fetch all prefixes for anyone who was bringing their own IP and just deleting all of them. And it took them 6 hours to recover, because I guess deleting the prefixes all had different actions where they didn't have like an easily undoable situation where it was like, oh, let's just take the snapshot and put it back. So that's what they're working on moving forward, is like having the snapshots of these prefixes. So if they delete it, they can resolve them. But it's like just another case of Cloudflare like having basic Go code that literally could be unit tested. But they said their just sandbox environment didn't match their production environment well enough, and that's what caused the outage. And I just don't understand. Maybe I need to reread the code, or maybe someone else who checks out the code will post more about it. But it seems like very simple Go code that you could unit test. So I don't understand why they had this outage, honestly. And especially if they're testing on sandbox as well, like, come on, like this is pretty simple stuff. And it also speaks to like what kind of code review are they using too, because I feel like CodeRabbit would have caught something like that. So maybe it kind of speaks to like AI should be taking software engineering jobs. I don't know, like we don't want to blame the engineers for these kind of things, but definitely something to keep an eye on. And then next, kind of similar to that last story, is that Railway basically had an outage because of the Cloudflare outage we previously discussed. They've been having a lot of issues, it seems. I don't know too much about their infrastructure. I'm a big fan of them. I think their UI is dope, but I don't really use them for hosting that much, because I just try to keep things as serverless as possible. But they did have an outage. People were really pissed. They blamed Cloudflare, and I guess they were also getting DDoS downstream as well, so that was unfortunate, so they had to handle that as well. But if you look at their uptime, if you look at their bare metal, I think it's like 99.87% uptime right now, which is just 2 nines, obviously. I know people really like try to say like, oh, we need 4 nines of operation, or stability. So like with 3 nines, right, which would be 99.9% uptime, that would be 8 hours of downtime per year. So still very low, but we're going for 0% downtime. We're trying to push like real production software. So I hope Railway can figure it out, and it definitely sucks because I know they moved off Google to kind of solve some of these problems, but I guess just like upstream providers will always let you down, and especially in the age of AI. Okay, next we have a tweet from Han Wang, I guess is how you say his name. I don't really know, but he works at Mintlify. But he's tweeting this chart that was posted by Anthropic, which shows in what domains are agents being deployed. So you can see software engineering is the highest one. I don't know exactly what this percentage means exactly. It says tool calls, but I don't know if that means like all tool calls being used by AI, or like all work being done in those industries. But software engineering is the highest. Back office is around 9.1%, and then all the rest are 5% or lower. So it is kind of cool. Like if you're looking for a product to work on, you can take one of these categories and try to figure something out, how to make it agentic. But it is one of those things, I'm really pushing it forward now. which I realized in the AI world, which is like AI does not mean you can build all of these products. If you're building all of these products with AI, I'm guaranteeing, I would bet money that they're not going to succeed. I would love to be proven wrong, but I really think you pick one of these, you just focus, you launch a really great product, you understand the problem and the customers and the competitive space really well, and that's where you're going to really succeed from getting this AI leverage of like doing best practices, making sure you have good planning, good systems, good growth, and just locking in on one thing and making sure you execute it all the way. Okay, and next we have a tweet from Colin from Clerk. I know a lot of people are using Clerk for their auth, so I just wanted to cover this really quick. I personally still roll my own auth, but if I was going to build something new, I would use Better Auth. I have used Convex Auth for one of my apps, and they're kind of like tearing it down, unfortunately, to go towards Better Auth. So that one's a deprecated one. I'm going to have to move over eventually. But just moving forward, I would recommend Better Auth. If you want to use a paid service, Clerk is solid, but they did have an outage, which a lot of people were very pissed about. In my experience, like these outages are tough, but it's not really the end of the world, but it is like people could not sign in to applications, and people did say that customers were churning because of Clerk. So it's a pretty gray situation. It's not black and white, but it is tough to kind of decide if you're going to use these auth providers, knowing that they can go down and it's out of your control. So they did have an incident, and he basically has a light postmortem here, which says that their database's auto-analyze settings triggered an errant query plan flip, which basically like decides how Postgres itself is going to fetch the data, especially if you have like really massive tables. You can like change how the query plans happen so that you can make sure it's more performant. And I guess they had some settings that made the database go really slow, and then it was kind of bottlenecking and people just weren't being able to be connected. It seems like the incident lasted about an hour, so that's definitely unfortunate, but they did resolve it quite quickly. I did look at their history though, and it seems like they also had an incident on the 9th of February, so that does suck, like multiple in 1 month, but you're going to have to decide how you want to do your auth, but personally, I'm going to recommend Better Auth moving forward. Okay, and then next we just have a tweet from this random guy. I don't know who this guy is, but he says he's an agentic engineer at butoshi.ai, and he's just talking about custom ES lint rules. This isn't really AI stuff, but I think it's so sick because it's like that whole idea of like AI makes it so best practices are possible, and really incentivizes you to really dive deep on your best practices. So you can see here he has like 2 patterns that he showed, which is the unified AI layer, so don't do any direct LLM calls, no direct telemetry, no hard-coded AI model, and he also has the error system pattern, which has no raw errors, no direct TRPC errors, no raw app errors in router. And, just so sick because linting obviously is much more deterministic than LLM reviews. So that's where it gets really important is like if you have a good CI/CD with linting and all these things, you can catch a lot of issues and just leave the AI to reviewing like proper behavioral issues and just making sure things are aligned and, catching maybe any other best practices that you might have missed or suggesting new linting. But that's where it's like as much as you can do like testing, linting, deterministic review of code, that's where we're going to feel a lot safer to merge these things. In my opinion, though, I don't think we're still at the point where it's like if it's green, it can be merged, even though people were doing that with continuous deployment and continuous development. Even before the age of AI, it really was like if everything is green, just merge it straight to prod. I don't know if we're still doing that. You still got to handle like database migrations and stuff, but you might want to do those things preemptively before you even make the PR, I guess, in that case. It would be interesting to kind of check out the continuous development book again, kind of in the age of AI and refresh some of those ideas, but definitely linting I'm fully on board for, and I think it's a great idea. Okay, then next we have a tweet from Google Labs, which is really sick. Basically, they have this new product, which I know a lot of startups are doing this, where they offer like an AI, put your product in a AI visual. So here it's a face cream. I guess their product Pomely has this new feature called photoshoot where you can basically do the same thing, and people are saying it's really solid. So if you have a physical product or even a digital product, I think I saw examples of people showing like apps and stuff rendered on an iPhone. You can try it out here at Google Labs, and very sick, and the marketing stuff, like we're saying, like with the age of AI, you still got to focus on one product, but it's like now you can go really deep on like some of these things, like, build a real marketing system, with these product photos and like really drive forward your product. And you don't need a whole team to do that like you used to, but you do need to be focused and make sure that you're delivering that and then measuring results and seeing how it works and all of that. Okay, and then next we have a tweet from Guillermo, which is pretty cool, just saying that Vercel API now exposes the billing endpoint, so you can actually see what your cloud infrastructure consumption looks like. You can run cost simulations, and it'll suggest optimization. So that's really cool. This kind of speaks to the idea of like now with AI, you need everything to be accessible via CLI. The web browser is actually the worst place for agents to do work. You want them to be able to use an API, MCP, or CLI. It seems like CLI is kind of the most deterministic because you can do like help, but then also now that you have the new Cloudflare MCP that we talked about, which just has search and execute, that's kind of interesting as well because you can just search for tools instead of having a massive like context of a list of like thousands of tools. But it's cool. It also uses like this focus standard, which I hadn't heard about before, but it's essentially a standard. I forget what it stands for, but it's an acronym for like financial ops or whatever. And you can take your cost data from all these different platforms like AWS, Google, etc., and Vercel now as well, and kind of blend it into one product as well. So I'm sure there's like dashboards and stuff that support focus where you can kind of view all these things at once, but now also you can just have your agent build these things. So that's where I feel like agents are really useful, is like, build me a product that renders focus data and fetches it from all of my different platforms that I'm supporting. And that's something sick, as opposed to being like, make a new data platform, like a live service, and let's launch it to the public, you know? It's like these internal tools is where AI can really be leveraged to gain a lot of data and like do some interesting cool stuff and experiment with these new ideas and APIs and functionality that's being launched. Okay, and our last story for today, I almost forgot to cover it, but it's just too interesting not to cover, is that the Financial Times released an article that basically said that Amazon's AI tool, which is called Kiro, and that was like their response to kind of TikTok's Tray, which are all like kind of responses to Cursor. They're essentially all Cursor competitors. I don't know if they're necessarily VS Code forks, but they are like full IDEs that have AI integrated. But basically, apparently Kiro deleted an environment. That's the main one that people are talking about, is that Kiro thought that it was trying to fix an environment and it basically deleted the whole thing and recreated it, which caused a, I guess, 13-hour interruption at one point. And I think there was another interruption as well, or an outage that affected AWS that was also caused by Kiro. So it's just, you know, one of these things, like you really got to monitor these agents, make sure they don't have access to do too much. And I guess our jobs are safe for now, you know, but the people who are going really vibe coding and tearing down environments, you know, they might be put on pips. I don't know, actually. I don't know what the ramifications are for doing something like this at a company like AWS, but I'm sure everyone was super stressed out when it was happening, and they're very disappointed about it now. You know, I know everyone's trying their best, I'm sure, but definitely something interesting, you know, a new world coming ahead for sure. All right, so now finally the last story. I had a few that I had to cover, just so much news in the past few days that I missed. You know, we really got to get back on the daily grind, but nonetheless, so we have a tweet from Summer Yu. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but I think it is. And she is the safety, and she runs safety and alignment at Meta and was part of the acquisition of Scale AI. And basically, she has this post where she's saying nothing humbles you like telling your OpenClaw to confirm before acting and watching it speedrun deleting your inbox. And basically, it shows like these pictures of OpenClaw just executing like trash everything in inbox older than February 15. And she's like, do not do that. Check how many left. She's still doing it. She says, stop, don't do anything. Stop OpenClaw. And then and then she's like, it seems like you were deleting emails without my approval and I couldn't get you to stop until I killed all processes on the host. And then it's like, yeah, I remember I violated it. You're right to be upset. So that's just so funny, you know. I don't really know what the takeaway is from this. Maybe don't give OpenClaw too much access to things, you know, if it can go rogue like this. I have noticed, like I was using OpenClaw this weekend actually to write like a big proposal. And I did notice that when I said wait, it actually would like abort the process and send me a message saying that it aborted. Maybe just like the token she used, like do not do that. Like if she had just said wait, maybe it actually would have stopped. I don't know. But very crazy, you know, such a crazy world. AI is definitely like, we kind of are past the honeymoon phase, I guess it seems, where it's like December, like I said previously, like everyone was so hype about all this stuff. They're like, oh, we're going to code everything. Software engineering's dead. And it's like, now you're just seeing a lot of this like slop and bugs and problems coming out. Maybe it's because OpenClaw is also 400,000 lines, kind of like Karpathy was saying. So maybe we just need a new version, but nonetheless, like definitely if you're in software engineering, you should feel pretty secure in your job right now, and we'll have to see like how things evolve. But it is scary that OpenClaw can do all these things. I haven't had it do anything bad for me. I loaded up my Obsidian vault. I'm having it do stuff for me there, and I think it's sick. But I definitely understand like why these things would be scary and why you might want to run it in a sandbox. This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.